He was just a carpenter, fixing her porch, a fleeting presence in her quiet Ashwood life. But when Margaret's gaze lingered too long, something shifted, something forbidden, heavy with the weight of their years apart. What she whispered next would haunt him for years. The train's wheels clattered against the tracks, a steady pulse that echoed in my chest as I leaned against the cool glass of the window. My name's Elias Thornton, 22, a carpenter's apprentice with sawdust still clinging to my jeans and a life that feels like it's just starting to take shape. I was on my way back to Burlington from Ashwood, a sleepy Vermont town tucked into the folds of the Green Mountains, where I'd spent the last 3 days fixing a porch for a woman named Margaret Hensley. It was a favor for my boss, who'd muttered something about her being a family friend before tossing me the job. The porch was a wreck, rotted beams, splintered railings, the kind of mess that takes patience and a steady hand. I'd gotten it done, left her with a nod and a smile, and now here I was, bone-tired, my duffel bag stuffed with tools wedged under the seat, the countryside blurring past in the twilight. The carriage was nearly empty, just a handful of passengers scattered like forgotten coins. A guy in a suit dozing with his briefcase clutched tight. An older woman knitting something shapeless, her needles clicking softly. The air smelled of stale coffee and the faint metallic tang of the train itself. My hands were rough, still dusted with sawdust despite my best efforts to scrub them clean at the station sink. My shoulders ached from hauling lumber, and my eyes burned from too many late nights planning cuts and measurements. Margaret's house had been quiet, too big for one person, with its creaking floors and wide windows that looked out on a yard gone wild. She'd been polite but distant, her dark hair tied back loosely, her eyes carrying a weight I didn't dare ask about. She was older, late 30s, I guessed, maybe 40, her beauty sharp and lived in, like a house that's been loved but weathered by storms. I'd fixed her porch, taken her quiet thanks, and left without looking back. Or so I thought. I shifted in my seat, the vinyl creaking under me, and pulled my jacket tighter against the chill seeping through the window. The train's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting stark shadows that flickered with every sway. I was half lost in thoughts of home, a cramped apartment in Burlington, a cold beer waiting in the fridge, when I heard footsteps in the aisle. Slow, hesitant, like someone wasn't sure where they belonged, I glanced up, and my breath caught. Margaret stood there, one hand gripping the back of a seat for balance, her coat slung over her arm, a small leather bag dangling from her fingers. Her eyes widened when she saw me, a mirror of my own surprise, her lips parting before she pressed them shut. Elias. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the train's hum, but it hit me like a jolt. I didn't expect to see you here. I sat up straighter, my heart kicking up a notch for no reason I could pin down. Mrs. Hensley, yeah, I'm heading back to Burlington. You too? She nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that felt oddly intimate in the dim light. Margaret, please, she said, her voice steady but warm. I've got an appointment in the city tomorrow. Took the evening train to save time. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the empty seats around us, then back to me. Mind if I sit? I gestured to the seat across from me, trying to keep my face neutral. Go ahead. She settled in, her movements careful, like she was stepping onto thin ice. Her coat slid onto the seat beside her, and she set her bag on the floor, close enough that it brushed my foot. Up close, I noticed the faint lines around her eyes, etched by time or worry or both, and the way her green sweater clung to her shoulders, soft but fitted, like she'd chosen it with care. She was beautiful, not in the loud way of the girls I knew back home, but in a quiet, grounded way, like a tree that stood through too many winters. I looked away, focusing on the window, where my reflection stared back, shadowed and tired. Long day? She asked, her voice pulling me back, gentle but curious. Yeah, I said, rubbing my hands together, the roughness of my palms grounding me. Your porch was a beast. Took longer than I thought, but it's solid now. Should last you a good while. Her smile was small but real, like I'd earned it. You did good work, Elias. I didn't think it could look that good again. Thank you. Just doing my job, I said, shrugging, but her words settled warm in my chest, like a fire catching on damp wood. My boss never praised like that, just grunted and moved on. Margaret's gratitude felt different, like it meant something. The train swayed, and her bag slid slightly across the floor. I reached down without thinking, pushing it back toward her, my knuckles grazing hers for a split second. Her hand was cool, mine rough and warm, and the contact sent a spark through me, sharp and unexpected. She pulled back fast, her fingers curling into her palm, her eyes darting to the window. Sorry, I muttered, my face burning. It's fine, she said, too quick, her voice tight. Silence fell, heavy but not empty, like the air before a thunderstorm. I could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, like she was holding something in. I wanted to say something, to ease the tension, but my mind was blank, stuck on the way her hand had felt against mine. We sat like that for a while, the train's rhythm filling the space between us. I tried to focus on the scenery outside. Fields fading into dusk, the occasional farmhouse glowing faintly, but my eyes kept drifting to her. The way her hair caught the light, the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her coat, she wasn't like anyone I'd met before, not the loud, carefree girls from Burlington bars or the gruff clients I worked for. Margaret was still, like a lake you could drown in if you weren't careful. You're quiet, she said suddenly, her voice teasing but soft, pulling me out of my head. Not much for talking, are you? I laughed, caught off guard. Guess not. Never know what to say half the time. That's rare, she said, leaning back slightly, her eyes studying me. Most people can't stop talking, even when they've got nothing to say. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, my throat tight. Her gaze held mine, searching, like she was trying to figure out what I was made of. It made me feel bare, like she could see the parts of me I didn't show anyone, the doubts about where my life was going, the dreams I barely admitted to myself, the way I sometimes felt like I was faking my way through being grown. You're young, she said, almost to herself, her voice softer now. What, 22? 22, I confirmed, feeling like I was admitting something bigger than my age. She nodded, her expression shifting like she was weighing something heavy. I was your age once. Feels like another life. I wanted to ask what she meant, what had changed, but her tone stopped me. It was like a door half open, inviting but guarded. Instead, I said, You don't seem that old to me. Her laugh was quiet, tinged with something bitter. I'm 38, Elias. Old enough to know better than to take late trains to cities I don't even like. Doesn't seem so bad, Jide said, surprising myself with the ease of it. Just you in the quiet? She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly like she was trying to decide if I was joking. Quiet's not always a good thing, she said, her voice low. Sometimes it's just empty. Before I could respond, the train lurched, the lights flickering. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a delay, some issue with the signals up ahead. We'd be stuck for a while, maybe an hour or more. A few passengers groaned, but Margaret just sighed, rubbing her temples with her fingertips. Perfect, she muttered. Just what I needed. You in a hurry? I asked, trying to keep things light. Not really, she said, her voice softening. Just tired. It's been a long week, a long year, actually. I nodded, unsure what to say. I wasn't good at this. Small talk, prying, any of it. But something about her made me want to try to fill the space between us with something real. You live alone out there? I asked, then cursed myself. Too forward, too personal. She didn't flinch, though. Mostly, she said, her eyes on her hands, now folded neatly in her lap. My daughter, Lila, is at college. It's just me in the house now. Too much space, too many echoes. I filed that away, a daughter, college, a house too big for one person. It painted a picture of her life, one I couldn't quite step into. My world was sawdust and paychecks, late nights with friends who didn't ask deep questions. Hers felt heavier, like it carried ghosts I couldn't see. The train's lights dimmed again, the carriage growing quieter as passengers settled into the delay. Margaret pulled her coat over her lap like a blanket, her movements slow, deliberate. "You ever feel like you're running from something, even when you're just sitting still?" she asked, her voice so low I almost missed it. I looked at her, caught by the weight of the question. "Yeah," I said, my voice rougher than I meant. "Like I'm supposed to have everything figured out, but I'm just making it up as I go." She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips, like she'd found something familiar in me. "That doesn't go away," she said. "You just get better at hiding it." I wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of whatever she was carrying, but the train jolted again, and the moment slipped away. She looked out the window, her reflection sharp against the dark glass, and I noticed the way her fingers tightened around her coat, like she was holding on to something she couldn't let go of. The conductor's voice came on again, saying the delay might stretch longer. Margaret sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. "Might as well get comfortable," she said, half to herself. I reached into my duffel, pulling out a granola bar I'd stashed from a gas station. "Want one?" I offered, holding it out. She looked at it, then at me, and for a second I thought she'd say no. But she took it, her fingers brushing mine again, lingering just long enough to make my pulse jump. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer now, almost fragile. We ate in silence, the crunch of granola loud in the quiet carriage. Outside, the world was a blur of shadows and distant lights, the kind of night that feels like it could swallow you whole. Sitting there with her, sharing something as simple as a granola bar, felt like more than it should have. Like we were stepping into something we couldn't name. Something that wasn't supposed to happen. The lights flickered again, and Margaret shivered, pulling her coat tighter. "It's getting cold," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling the chill through my own jacket. "Yeah. Long night ahead." She looked at me then, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment the world stopped. There was something in her gaze, something raw, something that made my chest ache with a need I didn't understand. Then she looked away, and the spell broke, leaving me breathless and unsteady. This was only the beginning. I had no idea how close we'd come to crossing a line neither of us could see. The train's hum had settled into my bones, a low, steady pulse that felt like it was holding the night together. The carriage was dimmer now, the fluorescent lights reduced to a faint glow, casting long shadows that danced across the empty seats. I sat across from Margaret, my hands restless, picking at a callus on my thumb, the roughness a reminder of the work I'd left behind in Ashwood. My flannel shirt, still draped over her shoulders, looked out of place against her green sweater like it belonged to another life. Her hands rested lightly on it, her fingers tracing the worn fabric absent-mindedly, and I couldn't stop noticing the way her hair fell loose from its tie, the way her breath fogged the window when she turned her head. My pulse was uneven, and I told myself to stop staring, to stop feeling whatever this was, but my eyes kept finding her, like she was the only thing solid in the swaying world of the train. The other passengers were ghosts now, some asleep, their heads lolling against headrests, others buried in their phones or books, the faint click of the knitting woman's needles the only sound besides the train's rhythm. The air was heavy, not just with the chill, but with something else, something that crackled between us like static. I shifted in my seat, the vinyl groaning under me, and tried to think of something to say, anything to break the silence that was starting to feel like a third presence in the room. My mind was a mess, caught between the ache in my shoulders from 3 days of carpentry and the way Margaret's presence seemed to fill the carriage, making it smaller, warmer, more dangerous. "You take this train a lot?" I asked, my voice louder than I meant, cutting through the quiet like a hammer on wood. She turned her head slowly, her eyes pulling away from the window like she was coming back from somewhere far off. "Not really," she said, her voice soft but with an edge, like she was choosing her words carefully. "A few times years ago. I don't get out of Ashwood much anymore." She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed the faint scar on her knuckle, a thin white line that looked like it had a story. I didn't ask. "Why not?" I said, then winced. Too personal, too soon. I was no good at this, at reading people or knowing where the lines were. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small thermos, the kind you'd carry on a long hike. She unscrewed the cap, and the scent of chamomile tea drifted over, warm and familiar, cutting through the stale air of the carriage. "Want some?" she offered, holding it out, the steam curling up in the dim light. I shook my head, my throat tight. "I'm good, thanks." She poured herself a small cup, her movements precise, like she was anchoring herself to the task. "I used to travel all the time," she said finally, answering my question like it had taken her a moment to decide it was worth it. "Before Lila, my daughter, before everything changed. Now it feels like too much work. Like the world's gone on without me and I'm just stuck." Her words hit me harder than I expected, like a weight I could feel in my chest. I was 22, still figuring out my own place, my own path, but I knew what it was like to feel like you're running in place. "You don't seem stuck," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Your house, the way you keep it, it's nice, like you've got it together." Her laugh was soft, almost sad, and it made something in me twist. "Looks can lie, Elias," she said, her eyes on the thermos, her fingers tightening around it. "That house is just a way to keep busy so I don't have to think too much about what's missing." I wanted to ask what she meant, what was missing, but the way she said it, quiet, raw, like she was letting me see something she usually kept locked away, stopped me. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped to keep them still. "I get that," I said, my voice rougher than I meant. "Sometimes I'm out there cutting boards or fixing something just to keep my head from spinning. Like if I stop, it'll all catch up." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and searching, like she was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. "You're too young to need that," she said, but there was no judgment in her voice, just a quiet curiosity that made me feel seen in a way I wasn't used to. "Maybe," I said, shrugging, my face warm. "But it's not about age, is it? Just life?" She tilted her head, studying me, and for a moment the carriage felt too small, the air too thick. "You're not what I thought you'd be," she said, her voice low, like she was talking to herself as much as to me. "Most guys your age are all bravado trying to prove something. You're different, like you're actually here." My chest tightened, and I looked down at my hands, suddenly aware of the dirt under my nails, the calluses that marked me as someone who worked with his hands. "Just don't have much to say," I said, trying to laugh it off, but my voice came out uneven. "That's not a bad thing," she said, and when I looked up she was smiling, a small, private smile that felt like it was meant just for me. My heart thudded, and I had to look away, out the window, where the world was a blur of black fields and distant lights. The train jolted, and her thermos tipped, spilling a splash of tea onto her coat. She muttered something under her breath, grabbing a napkin from her bag and dabbing at the stain, her movements quick and frustrated. I reached into my duffel without thinking, pulling out a clean rag I kept for wiping down tools. "Here," I said, holding it out. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, and this time the contact lingered, a fraction of a second too long. her skin cool against the warmth of my hand. My pulse jumped, and I saw the faintest flush on her cheeks, though it could have been the light. "Thanks," she said, her voice quieter now, and she focused on wiping the tea like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I stuffed my hands in my pockets, trying to shake off the heat crawling up my neck. She was 38, a mother, someone whose life was a world apart from mine. I was just the guy who fixed her porch, the kid who showed up with a toolbox and left when the job was done. But the way she looked at me, the way her voice softened when she spoke, it was doing something to me, stirring something I didn't know how to name. The train's lights flickered again, and the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, saying we'd be moving soon but to expect a slow crawl into Burlington. Margaret sighed, leaning her head back against the seat, her hands still clutching the rag. "This night's never going to end," she muttered, her voice laced with exhaustion. "Could be worse," I said, trying to keep things light. "Could be stuck on a bus with no heat." She laughed, a real laugh this time, bright and unexpected, and it was like the whole carriage came alive. "True," she said, her eyes meeting mine, sparkling for a moment before they softened. "At least I've got good company." I grinned, feeling a little bolder despite myself. "Good, huh? I'll take it." She shook her head, still smiling, but there was something new in her eyes, something careful, like she was pulling back from an edge. "Your trouble, Elias Thornton," she said, her voice teasing but with a weight I couldn't quite read. "Me?" I said, faking offense, my hand on my chest. "I'm just a guy with a hammer and a bad habit of spilling sawdust everywhere." "And a good heart," she added so quietly I almost missed it. She looked away, out the window, her reflection sharp against the dark glass, and I felt that pull again, stronger now, like a current dragging me under. The train started moving, slow and unsteady, the wheels grinding against the tracks. Margaret shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her, the flannel slipping slightly off one shoulder. "It's freezing in here," she said, rubbing her arms, her breath visible in the chilly air. I hesitated, then reached into my duffel again, pulling out a spare flannel shirt I kept for cold job sites. "Here," I said, holding it out. "It's clean. Mostly." She looked at it, then at me, and for a moment I thought she'd refuse. But she took it, her fingers brushing mine again, and this time neither of us pulled away as fast. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than before, and she draped the shirt over her shoulders like a shawl, her hands smoothing it out like it was something fragile. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. She looked smaller in my shirt, more vulnerable, and it made me want to protect her, even though I barely knew her. I didn't know what was happening, but it felt like we were teetering on the edge of something neither of us was supposed to want. The train picked up speed, the countryside blurring past again, a smear of dark fields and distant lights. Margaret leaned her head against the window, her eyes half closed, the flannel slipping slightly to reveal the curve of her collarbone. I watched her, not meaning to, but unable to stop. There was a strength to her, but also a fragility, like she was holding herself together with nothing but willpower. "You should try to sleep," I said, my voice low, almost lost in the train's hum. "It's a long ride." She opened her eyes, meeting my gaze, and for a second I couldn't breathe. "Maybe," she said, her voice soft, uncertain, "but I'm not sure I can." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. The silence settled again, but it was different now, charged, like the air was waiting for one of us to move, to speak, to break it. I could feel her watching me, even when I looked away, and it made my skin prickle like I was standing too close to a flame. The train swayed, and her bag slid again, bumping against my foot. I reached down to push it back, and when I looked up, she was closer, leaning forward slightly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Elias," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a breath. Why are you so kind to me?" The question hit me like a punch, and I fumbled for an answer, my mind racing. "I don't know," I said, my voice rough with honesty. "It just feels right, like I'm supposed to." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes dark and unreadable, and I felt like I was falling, like the floor of the train had dropped out from under me. Then she leaned back, breaking the spell, her hands tightening on the flannel. "You're a good kid," she said, but the word kid landed like a stone, heavy and wrong. "I'm not a kid," I said, sharper than I meant, my voice cutting through the quiet. "I mean, I'm young, sure, but I'm not some clueless teenager." Her eyes widened, surprised, and then she nodded, slow and deliberate. "I know," she said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I didn't mean it like that." But she didn't say anything else, and the silence stretched again, thicker, heavier, like it was holding its breath. I wanted to reach out to say something that would bring back that spark in her eyes, but I didn't know how. So I sat there, my hands clenched, watching her watch the world go by and wondering what it would be like to know her, really know her, beyond the porch and the train and the careful words we were both hiding behind. What she says next will change everything, and I'm not sure either of us is ready for it. The train's rhythm was a steady heartbeat, a low thrum that seemed to hold the night together, stitching the darkness with its relentless pulse. The carriage was a cocoon of dim light, the overhead fluorescence reduced to a faint flicker, casting shadows that stretched and swayed across the empty seats. I sat across from Margaret, my hands restless in my lap, my fingers tracing the calluses earned from days of hauling lumber and sanding wood. My flannel shirt, still draped over her shoulders, looked too big on her, the sleeves brushing her wrists, and I couldn't stop noticing the way her dark hair fell loose from its tie, curling against her neck, the way her breath caught the light when she exhaled, a faint mist in the chilly air. My pulse was uneven, a drumbeat I couldn't quiet, and I told myself to focus on anything else, the hum of the train, the blur of the Vermont countryside outside, but my eyes kept finding her, like she was the only thing real in this rattling metal box. The other passengers were shadows now, their presence barely registering. A man in a suit snoring softly, his briefcase clutched like a lifeline. A woman a few rows back, her knitting needles silent, her head bowed over a book. The air smelled of old upholstery, stale coffee, and that faint chamomile scent from Margaret's thermos, a warmth that cut through the cold. My shoulders ached from the work in Ashwood, my hands still rough with sawdust, despite scrubbing them raw at the station. Margaret's porch had been a battle, rotted beams, splintered railings, a job that demanded more patience than I thought I had. She'd been there, watching sometimes, her eyes distant but kind, her voice soft when she thanked me. 38, she'd said, old enough to know better. But there was something in her, a quiet weight, a story she carried in the lines around her eyes, that made her seem timeless, like she belonged to a world I couldn't quite touch. The silence between us was heavy, not empty but charged, like the air before a storm. I shifted in my seat, the vinyl creaking, and tried to find words to fill the space, to ease the tension that was starting to feel like a living thing. My mind was a tangle of thoughts, exhaustion from the job, the long ride ahead, the way Margaret's presence made the carriage feel smaller, more intimate, more dangerous. I wasn't good at this, at reading people or knowing what to say, but something about her made me want to try to reach across the gap between us. "You always take the late train?" I asked, my voice rough, louder than I meant in the quiet carriage. She turned her head slowly, her eyes pulling away from the window, where her reflection was sharp against the dark glass. "Not often," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, like she was choosing each word with care. "I used to, years ago when I had places to be. Now I don't leave Ashwood much." She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. and I noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly, like she was holding something back. "Why's that?" I said, then cursed myself silently. Too personal, too fast. I was stumbling through this, my words clumsy, but she didn't seem to mind. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out that small thermos, its silver surface catching the faint light. She unscrewed the cap, and the scent of chamomile tea filled the air, warm and grounding. "Want some?" she offered, holding it out, the steam curling up like a ghost. I shook my head, my throat tight for no reason I could name. "I'm good, thanks." She poured herself a cup, her movements slow, precise, like she was anchoring herself to the ritual. "I used to love traveling," she said finally, her voice low, almost a confession. "Before Lila, my daughter, was born. Before life got complicated. Now it feels like too much. Like I'm out of place anywhere but that house." She paused, her eyes on the thermos, her fingers tightening around it. "It's easier to stay put." Her words landed heavy, like stones in still water, and I felt them ripple through me. I was 22, still figuring out my own path, but I knew what it was like to feel stuck, to wonder if you're just going through the motions. "You don't seem like someone who's out of place," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Your house, it's beautiful, like you've made it yours even if it's quiet." Her laugh was soft, tinged with something sharp, like regret. "It's a shell, Elias," she said, her eyes flicking to mine, then away. "A pretty one maybe, but it's just me trying to keep the emptiness at bay. You fix things, porches, railings. I'm not sure I know how to fix what's broken in there." I wanted to ask what she meant, what was broken, but her voice carried a warning, a line I wasn't sure I could cross. Instead, I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped to keep them still. "I get it," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Sometimes I'm out there, hammering nails, just to keep my head from spinning, like if I stop, everything I'm avoiding will catch up." Her eyes met mine, sharp and searching, like she was trying to see through me. "You're too young to feel like that," she said, but there was no pity in her voice, just a quiet recognition that made my chest ache. "What are you running from?" I opened my mouth and closed it, caught off guard. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe just myself trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be." She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips, like she'd found something familiar in me. "That doesn't go away," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "You just learn to live with it." The train jolted, and her thermos tipped, spilling a splash of tea onto her coat. She cursed softly, grabbing a napkin from her bag and dabbing at the stain, her movements quick and frustrated. I reached into my duffel without thinking, pulling out a clean rag I kept for wiping down tools. "Here," I said, holding it out, my hand steady despite the way my heart was pounding. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, and the contact was like a spark, sharp and electric. Her hand lingered just for a moment, her skin cool against the warmth of mine, and I saw the faintest flush on her cheeks, though it could have been the dim light. "Thanks," she said, her voice quieter now, and she focused on wiping the tea, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I stuffed my hands in my pockets, trying to shake off the heat crawling up my neck. She was 38, a mother, a woman whose life was a world away from mine, full of responsibilities, history, things I couldn't begin to understand. I was just the guy who fixed her porch, the kid with sawdust on his jeans, and a life that hadn't started yet. But the way she looked at me, the way her voice softened when she spoke, it was stirring something in me, something I didn't know how to handle. The train's lights flickered, and the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom saying we'd be moving soon, but to expect a slow crawl into Burlington. Margaret sighed, leaning her head back against the seat, her hands still clutching the rag. "This night's gonna last forever," she muttered, her voice laced with exhaustion but also something else, something softer. "Could be worse," I said, trying to keep things light, though my voice betrayed me, coming out rough. "Could be stuck on a bus with a broken heater." She laughed, a real laugh, bright and unguarded, and it was like the carriage lit up, the shadows retreating for a moment. "Fair point," she said, her eyes meeting mine, sparkling with something that made my chest tighten. "At least I've got decent company." I grinned, feeling a spark of confidence despite myself. "Decent, huh? I'll take it." She shook her head, still smiling, but there was something new in her eyes, something careful, like she was stepping back from a ledge. "Your trouble, Elias Thornton," she said, her voice teasing but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite read, like she was warning herself as much as me. "Me," I said, pressing a hand to my chest, faking offense. "I'm just a guy with a toolbox and a bad habit of getting sawdust everywhere." "And a good heart," she said, so quietly I almost missed it, her eyes dropping to her hands, where my rag was still clutched tight. The words hung there, heavy and real, and I felt them settle in me like a weight I wanted to carry. The train started moving again, slow and unsteady, the wheels grinding against the tracks. Margaret shivered, pulling her coat tighter, the flannel slipping slightly to reveal the curve of her shoulder. "It's freezing in here," she said, rubbing her arms, her breath visible in the chilly air. I hesitated, then reached into my duffel again, pulling out a spare flannel shirt I kept for cold job sites. "Here," I said, holding it out. "It's clean, mostly." She looked at it, then at me, and for a moment I thought she'd refuse. But she took it, her fingers brushing mine again, and this time neither of us pulled away as fast. Her touch lingered, a fraction of a second too long, and my pulse jumped, my skin prickling with something I couldn't name. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than before, almost fragile, and she draped the shirt over her shoulders like a blanket, her hands smoothing it out like it was something precious. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. She looked smaller in my shirt, more vulnerable, and it stirred something in me, a need to protect her, to be closer even though I knew I shouldn't. She was older, her life full of things I couldn't touch, but sitting there with her wrapped in my flannel, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. The train picked up speed, the countryside blurring past, a smear of dark fields and distant lights. Margaret leaned her head against the window, her eyes half closed, the flannel slipping slightly to reveal the curve of her collarbone. I watched her, not meaning to, but unable to stop. There was a strength to her, but also a fragility, like she was holding herself together with nothing but will. "You should try to sleep," I said, my voice low, almost lost in the train's hum. "It's a long ride." She opened her eyes, meeting my gaze, and for a second the world stopped. Her eyes were dark, searching, and I felt like I was falling, like the floor of the train had dropped away. "Maybe," she said, her voice soft, uncertain, "but I'm not sure I can." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. The silence settled again, but it was different now, charged, electric, like it was waiting for one of us to break it. I could feel her watching me, even when I looked away, and it made my skin burn, like I was standing too close to a fire. The train swayed, and her bag slid again, bumping against my foot. I reached down to push it back, and when I looked up, she was closer, leaning forward slightly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Elias," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a breath. "Why are you so kind to me?" The question hit me like a wave, and I fumbled for an answer, my mind racing. "I don't know," I said, my voice rough with honesty. "It just feels right, like I'm supposed to be here, helping you." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes dark and unreadable, and I felt like I was drowning in them, like I'd said too much and not enough all at once. Then she leaned back, breaking the spell, her hands tightening on the flannel. "You're a good kid," she said, but the word kid landed like a stone, heavy and wrong. "I'm not a kid," I said, sharper than I meant, my voice cutting through the quiet. "I mean, I'm young, sure, but I'm not some clueless teenager. I see you, Margaret. I see you." Her eyes widened, surprised, and then she nodded, slow and deliberate, like she was acknowledging something she didn't want to admit. "I know," she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I didn't mean it like that." But she didn't say anything else, and the silence stretched again, thicker, heavier, like it was holding its breath. I wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to say something that would bring back that spark in her eyes, but I didn't know how. So I sat there, my hands clenched, watching her watch the world go by and wondering what it would be like to cross that line, to step into the space where she lived, where her pain and her strength and her quiet beauty all met. What she says next will change everything, and neither of us is ready for it.